Hello, and what an honor to be closing out a great first day of the main summit. It is Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and it is no secret that the industry is facing increasing criticism when it comes to mobile sports betting. And there are a lot of questions. One of those questions is, where does the responsibility lie? So that's what we're going to be diving into today. Where does the responsibility come when it comes to the operators, when it comes to players? What's the line in between? And more importantly, what can we do being better? So Tammi, I'm going to start with you. Where do you see that line between player responsibility and operator responsibility?
So it's a really good question, but I think it is sort of like a continuum. So I think the operators have a responsibility to provide as many resources, as many tools that are out there. I think operators should always be looking for innovative ways to protect consumers. But I also believe that there should, once we have raised the awareness, I think that players should use more of the tools because obviously we know that they're there to help them along their player journey. So I think we have to provide as much as we can, and we have to encourage our players to use them as best as they can. So that's what I think.
Absolutely. And certainly we will be diving a lot into tools during this session. Got some good experts in that space. So Sarah, I want to kick it to you next. Obviously, we've seen so much in the media recently, more news stories, even SNL talking about this issue, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. I never would have seen that years ago. I'm curious from your perspective, how does what's going on in the media influence this question of responsibility, particularly does it impact increased regulations on operators? Does the media have a big importance here?
Sure. Media absolutely has an impact on regulation, public perception, operator response and activity, but I think it's important to realize that we're just as concerned, right? Any perception of problematic gambling and underage play, prohibited bettors engaging in wagering, operators are just as concerned, which is why we have a variety of tools available for patrons to utilize. We promote resources that are available from our regulatory agencies. I was listened in on a panel earlier today with Don Hamel, who was referencing the tools that Louisiana offers. And it's a responsibility of operators to provide those resources to players in an accessible way. BetMGM does so through our promotion of the GameSense program. In every jurisdiction that we operate in, we've got a page dedicated to mental health resources, problem gambling coalitions, the relevant jurisdictional hotline, and resources not only for patrons, but also for families looking to learn more about signs and indicators of problem gambling. So I think it's important to take criticism in the media with a grain of salt, with the understanding that operators are just as concerned.
I'm glad you mentioned mental health. We had a really great discussion about mental health yesterday, just from the context of how do we destigmatize problem gambling, because it's a legitimate mental health condition, and it seems like technology is a great way to do so. So how do you see us being able to use responsible gambling tools to help with players' mental health?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a cause that's close to my heart. Specifically, I've been in gaming for over a decade, and that's actually how Tammi and I met, our time with GTech and IGT. But now at BetMGM, we recently launched a pilot program with KindBridge. Right now it's in Colorado, but we're expanding to 8 additional states and into the Ontario market to provide patrons who may have an issue with their gambling or their families with resources to do a self-assessment, look for signs, potential indicators of problematic play, and connect those patrons and their families directly with mental health resources. The important distinguishment here with our relationship with KindBridge is those services are actually free of charge. Now, people don't have universal access to healthcare, especially mental health providers. And so this is a really groundbreaking initiative that BetMGM is engaging in, and I'm really proud of the work and the partnership that we have with KindBridge.
And I love that Sarah brought up families, because that is probably one area where I really feel that more should be focused on. It's because the families and the loved ones are the ones that are dealing directly with it, and they often don't know how to get help. And so I really love that you brought that up, and it's something that we're working very hard at Bally's as well.
That's great.
I think I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit, where we talk about the families and the outreach that they need when somebody potentially has a problem. But I think there's the opportunity to look even earlier in the life cycle. We know that people have access to gaming materials that might not be play, that might just be through social media. But even at a younger age, we need to talk about the markers of harm. How do you identify them? We need to talk about this with our kids and educate them so that long before they become of age to gamble, they're aware of those markers of harm, the emotion tethered to them, and that gives them a base going into the gaming industry, knowing how do I self-manage, and I think that makes you more open to seeing responsible gaming commentary within the app.
Actually, I'm from Denmark. Some people know that. The Danish gambling authorities have a program where they have employees from the regulator going out educating high school classes in exactly that, to try to train underage Gen Z to better understand what actually gambling is and how it works. Not necessarily to, let's say, to prevent them from gambling, but if they do gamble, then they gamble on a better foundation of knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like a common theme with all of this is normalizing those kinds of conversations. So it's great to hear that progress. Raz, I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, there are so many great tools out there when it comes to responsible gambling. A question I think is what's working? What do we know players are using, and what is actually effectively helping them?
So at Mindway AI, we are a provider of such tools. So of course I can speak from the work we do. We have two solutions actually out there. One solution based on neuroscience as a self-test tool, where we ask the player to play a card game, a much more engaging card game than the typical self-test way of with questionnaires, and that takes roughly 2 to 3 minutes. We assess the decision making when gambling based on neuroscience theory, and give feedback on what was assessed, plus self-evaluation, as well as 3 specific advice on what we detected. That's the gamified self-test that is, we're a little bit proud of that, to say that over here. So far, to my understanding, the only safer gambling tool that has gone nationwide here in the US, because it's an integral part of the responsibleplay.org website powered by NCPG, with whom we have a collaboration, and funded by NFL via NFL Foundation. So that's one thing, and we have other customers in Europe using that, and we see definitely, because we do statistics on an aggregated level of that self-test, and we provide that to the operators and the gambling companies who use that software. That significant statistics on the self-test and how long time it takes, how much it is actually used. And with one customer, we have deployed the opportunity to get this report emailed to them. And that corresponds quite neatly to a normal prevalence of roughly 2%.
Wow.
So we can only hope that some of those are actually players who self-assessed and realized that they needed some kind of help. Yeah. So that is the one example. The other example we have is our most widespread solution, where we use AI, machine learning algorithms we combine and train with human psychologist assessments to give a much more accurate monitoring of the gambling behavior. We want to create the picture of the gambling behavior on each and every player every day. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of difficult when you build it into algorithms, because gambling behavior is a human individual behavior. So our behaviors here would be different because we are different human beings. Right. And that does not adapt very well to AI. So So the ability to do a much more individualized assessment of the gambling behavior, and then also with that find the very few percent who show signs of at-risk or problematic gambling behavior is definitely something. And we see it works. We see some of our customers have done internal reviews that it definitely decreases the risk level in their customer database when it's also used for intervention, which we provide the foundation for.
So and there's a different dynamic in the U.S. versus Europe, as you all know. In the U.S., it feels like the onus can be a lot on the player, where they're the ones who have to use the tools, set the limits. But abroad, there's a lot more government mandating of tools, whether it's affordability checks. Rachel, I'm curious, where do you see the difference between how companies are responding to regulation and doing these kinds of things because the government is telling them to, or whether they're actually going above and beyond when it comes to responsible gambling?
Yeah, in general, I would see it from my perspective, where we provide, let's say, risk assessment of a customer database, basically. Sadly, I would say if not all, then the vast majority of all jurisdictions across the world, operators mainly want to talk to us because there's some sort of regulation where they have to.
That's interesting.
However, there are also opportunities in some sort of business case, because imagine if we were able to make RD operations unemployed in the sense that you were able to keep the risk level in the customer database on a more sustainable level, on a low level. RD operations will never be unemployed because there will always be cases. But if we can minimize the cases, then we could utilize the cost of gaining the customer in the first place and save the cost on the case handling and save the human personal cost on the gambler side. So that's some of the opportunities I see.
Sure. I'm curious what you've seen in the U.S., Rachel. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think historically you'll notice that all operators have the same RG tools. We haven't done a great job at differentiating that because those are the tools regulated. So we have those. I think I want to make sure that I represent everyone equally. We are all trying our best, and many times we're up against very large business goals, and sometimes as a result, RG is a part of that, but not the main focus or feature. And so with that being said, I think that from the US marketplace, we need to do a better job at disrupting and looking what has happened in Europe. How do we ensure that we're making the right decisions? Because while these two marketplaces are different, ultimately the same root issues still exist. So I think that we've taken steps towards it, but I hope to see over the next 2 years, we are truly moving forward, disrupting what we have today. And again, just because it's regulated, how do we look beyond that and see what do our players actually want and need to help drive regulation and inform regulators?
I have a couple comments to that topic. Coming from one of the big operators in the US, I think my expectation is that you do see a dramatic push forward in this space. I think it's imperative to the success of all operators, but specifically the larger operators, to tackle responsible gambling, responsible marketing, player intervention models with real seriousness and sophistication, both from a platform development perspective, but also, dynamic resourcing available to patrons that allow them to both self-assess, but then take real action. And that, that's looking at Europe and seeing what has happened in that market, and in one hand, embracing it and learning from the regulations there, and on the other hand, wanting to avoid, potentially the significant sanctions and stuff that were put into place there. And so we can have both. You can have a successful revenue-generating business, but your paramount priority is player protection and sustainability.
And I just want a couple. Also, I agree with what you're saying. And I was fortunate when I worked at Rush Street Interactive. They were willing to take the risk with working with Nekton, and really, it was fascinating because the way that players self-assess versus the way that you can actually see their play over time, they sometimes don't match, right? And so there's I'm not a research person, and I'm sure you could speak more about that, but
Absolutely.
I found that to be very fascinating because I think that there is a misconception that they even have about themselves, so that's an opportunity. But I also think that, working from Bally's, in the UK, there's the requirement that you have to have the single the view, to look into what players are doing. And I think that that's a wonderful, I think we should be learning from the other markets because regulate yourself before you're regulated. And we know it's only a matter of time before things are becoming more and more strict here in the US. So I think bigger operators and maybe the big five need to, take a risk, or maybe somehow we can all come together and decide on, what does that look like for the industry so that we can begin to move forward.
And I want to go back to something Rachel said, which is you guys are still businesses. Like, there is a business case for responsible gambling, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out how to balance responsibility and profitability. So
Yes.
I'd love to hear from you, Tammi. How do you balance those two very different, but also very convergent things?
Yeah, I kind of came up with sustainability versus profitability, right? But I think that the key is you want long-lasting players. You want people that are going to be on their journey with you for a long time, not just a short time. So I think it behooves operators to really take a look at what those numbers are, right? If you can look and see that the top tier of your players, maybe they are VIP, and yes, those are very important, but are they also people that are having at risk for gambling problems, right? And so I think that we can't run away anymore from what I think research is beginning to glean. And so I think that we have to start to find that mix. And I think that Canada, is doing it very well in a lot of ways, but one of them is around responsible advertising. It's like, you cannot just say you're going to do an advertising campaign. We want to know, what are you doing? Who are you targeting? What are the KPIs? And so now it's a balance, right? And so I think, again, we need to take advantage of that before regulators start writing that into law. And we need to find a way as an industry to balance things like that.
I'm just curious to follow up on one point. What do you think is holding the industry back from doing that?
I think lack of understanding. I think that, I can say that all of the RG and compliance people that I've met that work at all the operators are certainly pushing for it. But I think it is still a fear around data. I think that data, that whole idea of bringing a third party and they are taking your whole database and they're doing something with it, I think there's a fear in there. Because even when we adopted it during my time at Rush Street, the biggest thing was getting past the data privacy. And I'm sitting there looking at our data privacy lawyer right there when I was at Rush Street, but that was a big hurdle.
Yeah. Ras?
I have a couple of comments to what you say. First and foremost, the software we provide to avoid exactly that. I took a very early decision when we started off 5 years ago that we provide our software as deployed in the IT environment of the operator. We are not a hosted solution. Well, we have a hosted solution now, but we didn't. And the reason why we didn't do that was to meet the operators that they didn't have to share the data outside of their own IT environment. That has been a huge advantage and one of the best decisions I have taken at Mindway. The other thing is when it comes to the model and how it works and what it detects, we wanted to not only focus on changes in behavior, because problem gambling behavior can be contained for a long time without changing, and then suddenly it can spin out of control. And the accuracy of the model is, as I see it, very important. Also, when you speak into to the business case stuff, because if you have less sophisticated detection or models in place, for instance, based on thresholds, then you will get a higher number of false positives also. Those false positives you would likely have to handle, but then you are also annoying some of your best customers. So with a much more accurate solution in place, we have a GLI test saying that our solution is detecting 87% like a human psychologist would, then it taps into also a proper intervention to the very few customers who need it, but no or lower intervention to the other ones.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult actually.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. The potential seems great, though. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to close with just one more question for all of you. Looking ahead at the next year, what do you think the biggest issues are going to be? Or let's do one per person. When it comes to responsible gambling, what's the most important thing for companies, and what's the most important thing we're going to have to look at for players? Tammi, kick us off.
I think that, I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question, but I think there needs to be more done to understand what communication actually works. What communication or what are the interventions that will change behavior? So I really hope that is something that over the next year that we find out. And I think just generally, I think more operators need to embrace the changes that are coming through solutions like Mindway and just embrace it and run with it.
I love that.
I was going to say that from a platform and product perspective, there's an investment in product enhancements to make tools easy to use, easy to find, engaging for players so they want to actually use them and they're not, prohibitive because they're difficult to navigate. And then investment in research. BetMGM has invested in ICRG to do marketing research for us. And it's going to tell us at the end of the year, is your marketing, and not just ours, the whole industry, is it having a negative impact on potential problem gamblers? And so approaching these issues in parallel paths, right? Product enhancements, ease of access, easy to use tools, but also being smart, looking at the data, and to Tammi's point, figuring out what actually works to create a sustainable market, but also to prevent problematic play.
Raz.
Yeah, we have, of course, we are an innovative tech company, so we have a lot of things on our plate this year, but definitely support even better, much more optimized, automated functionality around the messaging. So also make it so just reach more customers with the same capacity or same hands in the RG Ops. We, of course, also look into how to utilize our quite sophisticated detection into more tools in terms of connected to handling of responsible marketing, more individualized, earlier communication opportunities if the operator wants. That would be some of the things we are looking into enhancing this year.
Rachel, want to bring us home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two big ones is first, how do we begin to leverage our influencers, our social media to normalize communication about responsible gaming? So changing just where that's coming from and the way that we begin talking about that. And then I think kind of the second piece is, I love sitting up here, I love talking about responsible gambling, but I hope next year what we're talking about is we saw this work and everybody should go out and try that.
Exactly.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
Couldn't find a better way to close than that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.